This is Rob Gray from ASU and PerceptionAction.com. Today on the Perception and Action podcast, my interview with Shawn Myszka from Movement Mastery, talking about using ecological dynamics to enhance motor learning and the upcoming Sport Movement Skill Conference. Hi everyone, welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. On April 6th and 7th of this year, the first Sport Movement Skill Conference will be held at Concordia University in Minnesota. In today's episode, I have the organizer Shawn Myszka back on the podcast. Along with discussing the details of the event, we talk about the ecological dynamics movement in coaching. Why does it strike a chord with so many people? How do we need to move forward to use it effectively? Hope you enjoy.
Not 10 years ago, I was a child. I was a good boy and you let me go. Now I'm on a talk show.
My guest today, appearing on the podcast for the third time, is Shawn Myszka from Movement Mastery. Thanks and welcome back, Shawn.
Good morning, my friend. I appreciate you having me as well, and I always look forward to our chats and interactions, no matter how they take place, whether it's on the podcast or in your office or at a conference that we're passing by at.
Yeah, definitely. And that, of course, that's the main thing we wanted to talk about today is the event you have coming up on April 6th and 7th. It's the first ever Sport Movement Skill Conference. And so I wanted to kind of ask you a lot of questions about that. But I guess to start off with, you know, what is the impetus of this? Where it was the idea, where it came from, and, you know, your overall goals for it?
Yeah, great question. And of course, we could probably talk for a while on that because I know that you sort of know the backstory on it all. First off, before I get going, I do want to thank you in particular because I've been talking about putting on an event such as this for a 4 or 5 year period of time. And when you put on the Skill Acquisition Arizona meeting back in October that I was, that you so graciously had me present at, it just really fired me up and sort of lit this, passion deeper and this energy deeper in my belly in order to make sure that I actually executed in 2018 on this Sport Movement Skill Conference. So thank you for that and bringing people together because that's really what it's about for me. I talk constantly, and you and I sort of have this relationship where we've talked about the need for integration between the researchers, the academics, the coaches, the therapists, anyone and everyone who works with athletes in regards to movement skill and movement skill acquisition. And that's really what the whole overriding objective of the Sport Movement Skill Conference is going to be about. It's all about integration and bringing us all together to create a movement per se, and the pun is intended there. So to create this movement where we all aim to understand sport movement behavior more deeply, more intimately, we can continue to have certain dialogue and bring people together who are thought leaders as well as are forward thinking in regards to collaborating on ideas and trying to take some of the great information that's out there, the empirical evidence, and bridge it then with the anecdotal side and just continue to get this conversation started so we can take some of the ideas that we have from decades worth of research and start to disseminate that among the practitioners who are out there on the fields and on the court and in the rinks working with athletes. And I think the more that we can do that, the more we're all going to be able to come together and not only understand sport movement behavior, but start to hopefully help athletes acquire greater sport skill when and where it counts, which of course is out on the field, out on the track, out on the court, wherever it might be that they actually perform their sport. Hence the reason we're sort of taking this conference theme for this our inaugural event as using this ecological dynamics lens or viewpoint as a way to try and understand sport movement behavior more fully.
Yeah, as I say, obviously syncs up with what I was trying to do and what I tried to do with the podcast too as well. And I was talking to someone about this the other day, you know, the standard sports conferences I've gone to, you go to a 5-day conference and you'd be lucky if there's an hour session on the topic like this. So on skill acquisition. And I think I wanted to ask you kind of about the timing, right? I know, like you said, you're deliberately using, you've been using the hashtag We Are the Movement. And in your description, you talk about a revolution. And, I think, what do you think about, that? I think the timing for this is just, there's so many people interested in this. We had an exchange on Twitter last week where I was talking about the difference in the openness of coaches now. It depends on the sport, but so what do you think, is it this We Are the Movement, like the landscape right now, how we can change things? What do you think about that? Yeah.
I was asked a week or two ago in a major sports publication who was asking me about this very same topic as I was talking about the idea of a movement skill acquisition coach or facilitator among professional sports teams. And 5 or 6 years ago, when we started to really have this conversation about some of the old traditional models and some of the theories and maybe the lack of implication or transference that at least I was seeing at my sport in American football, and why I felt there was a need for a revolution then at that point in time. And I started to go down a different path as we've told that story here before on Perception Action Podcast. But I think right now, in comparison to where we were 5 years ago, people are willing to have the conversation. People are talking about it. When I joined Twitter, that 5 or 6 years ago, no one was having that conversation. No one wanted to talk about coupling perception and action. No one wanted to talk about discovery, learning, and representative task design and constraints-led approach and maybe a more implicit way of teaching or coaching or facilitating movement skill. That just was a foreign thought at that point. And now it's so humbling to see, because you look around and you see the reception of the ideas across all in the profession, and people are willing to push the envelope and challenge some of our previously held thoughts now. Again, like you said, some sports more than others. I'm still fighting an uphill battle to a certain degree in American football, but we're having more of these conversations, and it's almost daily that I'm interacting with coaches, not only in this country in the United States, but across the world now, because of people who are willing to have the conversation oriented around some of these ideas and linking the performer with the environment and trying to understand sport movement problems in this way and how sport movement solutions in the behavior is actually emerging. We just weren't having these conversations back when you and I had originally met, and happened the reason, that we connected so quickly. But now there's more of us connecting together, and we do become a movement.
Yeah. And I'm always kind of amazed, and I guess I'm not surprised at all by how attractive and appealing these concepts are to so many people. The ecological dynamics, constraints, perception, action, coupling. It's not any easier way to coach. It's probably harder.
Probably more difficult. Yeah.
So it's amazing to me how people, the reaction. It reminds me when I've taught ecological psychology to students. Not everybody, but a large proportion just grasp onto it as, I don't know, it's something, it rings true with people. I don't know if you've had the same experience.
I do. Once people get over the idea, and they, of course, when you hear ecological dynamics and you talk about ecological psychology on one side and sort of trying to understand information and what it means to sport movement solutions that are going to emerge, and then you connect that to some of the dynamical systems theory and the complex systems and sciences, at the base level, there's a lot of complexity there. So sometimes it overwhelms people, but yet on the same token, when you really start to peel apart the layers on that, and you really start to look at the different dimensions, we do find, as you and I have talked in the past, that coaches are already doing a little bit of that. They just don't know some of the lingo and the verbiage that goes along with it. But it really resonates with people when they watch sport movement and they try to analyze it and they attempt to understand it. It is complex. Sport movement is complex. It's not nice and neat and sexy. Well, sometimes it's sexy depending on if you end up in the end zone or not. But the way that we look at the understanding of it and then the acquisition of that skill, when the sport movement problems that occur in a practice environment are a little more messy, and they involve that which what looks and acts and feels and behaves like the problems that do in sport. Coaches, researchers, academics, and even therapists alike can sort of come to this common ground and realize that maybe that representative task probably is the direction that I need to go versus this perfect rote rehearsal repetition that I've been doing or adhering to for all this time that maybe I saw a lack of transference with. And I think that's why people start to gravitate towards the ecological dynamics ideas or anything underneath that umbrella. It's really just becomes common sense then that begins to explain more of that which what we're actually witnessing in the messiness of sport.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it just, you're right. It connects with what a lot of people already know works. It's just different language. So, all right, let's dive into some of the specifics. So, the conference. So the theme is using ideas from ecological dynamics to enhance motor behavior in sport, myself excluded. Because one of the really impressive things is the lineup of speakers you have. The mix of academics and researchers and practitioners and coaches, I think, is really admirable. You rarely, if ever, see this. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, kind of some of the speakers.
Yeah, for me personally, when I started to put out the speaker invites, of course you were at the top of that list. So I know you're trying to be humble there on that end, but you were definitely the first email that went out. That being said, of course, if our goal and our objective is going to be oriented towards integration, I knew first and foremost we had to come common ground and had to have every single one of those respective niche groups that are going to impact sport movement skill in some way, shape, or form represented as a presenter and giving and offering thoughts, because I want this to be a facilitation of thoughts for all involved that are in attendance and the attendees, because the attendees are really going to be the people who drive the movement. And so I wanted to have individuals who are presenting and speaking that we're going to be able to associate with, connect with a wide, diverse net of people. And it wasn't just to get butts in the seats of the conference. It was to actually bring us all together. So at your table, you could potentially have a researcher, a professor, you could have a physical education teacher, you could have a strength and conditioning coach, you could have a football position specific coach, you could have a sports scientist. And you could have all of these people at the same table talking about similar things coming from their respective direction. And so I wanted the speaker list to exhibit or display that as well. And I feel very humbled by the reception of individuals such as yourself, as well as the rest of the speakers who were so willingly doing that. Because sometimes that can be a daunting task to be able to package your message in a way that can truly resonate with all of those different types of people who wear different hats than you may. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, to get individuals like yourself and Carl Newell, obviously one of the fathers of the constraints-led approach, the real innovator of constraints-led approach, and individuals, even then that are out there in the cold face, if you will, or in the fire, such as Scott Solwasser from Texas Tech, speaking in regards to how he utilizes representative tasks in big groups. Then we have someone like Cam Joss who's working with more individuals or small groups. We can see how these ideas start to sort of resonate across the group. And then we bring in other individuals such as performance therapists, like a guy that I work really intimately with, Dr. John Graves, who is also a performance therapist. And he's looking at movement in a much different way than I am. But he's going to start to talk about examples between he and I and how he and I correspond with one another when we look at the same athlete moving together out on a football field to try and either get back or acquire a new skill or refine new skill. And so all of these individuals that I sort of brought together, I wanted to represent those respective hats. So when you look at sort of the topics that are being discussed, everything from cueing and constraints-led approach to how that impacts on movement coordination and control and organization of skill, to decision-making and training across different types of developments of athletes. I know Shawn Larkin, who I believe you know from the LA Dodgers, is graciously speaking and presenting about that. To Christina Speckos from Purdue University, who I've put together a few pieces with for NSCA type of journal articles, and she's going to be speaking on decision-making training. So I wanted all of these ideas truly represented, so there was not only something for everyone, but we could learn from everyone that kind of wears those different hats. And so to me, that was really important in order to have that really be the reality of this event if I was going to undertake it.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. Coming at it from different angles and people's different approaches. And I'm sure, people will get lots of ideas of how to walk away and implement things on their own after this. And so along with the speakers, there's going to be some interactive kind of section as well?
Yeah. So for every 3 hours of presenting, I have an hour of sort of think tank, where I'm going to set some tables across around the room, and they'll have a little, sign or something that says, this table, we're going to be talking for the next hour, and you can kind of jump around table to table if you desire. This hour is going to be talking about affordances, or this table is going to be talking about affordances, and this table is going to be talking about maybe the decision making and the application of drills, and this side is going to be talking about movement coordination and so on and so forth, So I sort of have this running list of topics right now that I've been putting together that is far too long, as you could probably imagine, for how many tables will be in there at this moment. So I'm going to have to streamline that a bit. But basically what I want to do is these sort of little group think tanks. Because I think too often at conferences, much as you mentioned before, not only is sports skill and movement skill not talked about enough, but we don't actually get into the nitty gritty and actually have conversations where we can sort of peel back those layers a little bit more, ask the questions that we really have, and then come to common ground with maybe a presenter or a speaker in regards to what their message was in their 50 minutes of presentation. So I'm going to have not only the presenters obviously get involved with that, but then also the attendees can really get a little bit more out of it as well. And maybe they were too intimidated, or they didn't have the opportunity to ask their question of the respective presenter when they were speaking. But this would be their opportunity to interact with that individual. And I don't know about you, but when I've been at conferences and such, those are the times that I actually end up taking the most notes and take the most home with me. And those interactions are things that create sort of these bonds for the future, these connections for the future that allow me to dive in a little deeper with people whose message either resonates with me or who I have more questions of. And so I wanted that to be built into the conference structure, much like what you did. So I'm taking, again, another influence of yours. It looks like I'm just trying to copy you and try to one-up you in one way, shape, or form here. But so again, off of an influence of your conference, that was something that I really took a lot from, is having that opportunity for those interactions.
Yeah, I really think that's good. It also reminds me of, you're wearing the shirt Altus events when they do their poolside chat that's not around a pool. But I really enjoyed that one last time, where you get a chance to interact with the audience and other people, the coaches and stuff, instead of it being so passive. I think that's really good.
Yeah, I agree completely. And of course, those are the things that I live and breathe for, because I think that's where we all kind of push ourselves out of that comfort zone, and we get a little bit more uncomfortable, and we challenge our thoughts a little bit. We kind of take ourselves to our own challenge point with our knowledge, that we're not just up there rehearsing or regurgitating or scripting something. We're actually having interaction and trying to sort of formulate our thoughts in a way that is packaged to that person's respective situation and scenario in their own group and population that they're working with.
Yeah, no, and then another interactive event, of course, if people are listening, will already heard about this last week from the other side of the pond, is this connection you're going to do on the Saturday with the movement skill group in Ireland. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I'm obviously extraordinarily excited about. I don't know if anything like this has ever really been done before, at least within our respective field. I'm sure there's quite a few people doing it in other fields, but I believe that this will be the first time that something like this actually will occur, where we're going to be linking with the Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland group there in Cork. Ed and Phil and Oli and Alan, that group and I, at least Ed and Alan and I, have been speaking about doing something like this for a significant period of time. And when I decided to put these dates down, they kind of let the cat out of the bag to me in some personal messages that they decided to do exactly the same thing. And like you said, the listeners will have heard from them a week prior than hearing this and me talk about it. But I could not be more excited about it, because I got on the phone or on Skype, I should say, with Ed and Alan a few weeks ago, and we just kept talking and talking and talking. Before you knew it, like 2 hours had passed, and all we really had done was talk about how much there was a need for this type of integration. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to link up via Skype in front of both our respective groups and do as long of a period of time as both of our respective groups desire to have sort of a big collective think tank, a big brainstorm, if you will, and people like Carl Newell will be in our attendance and ours, and of course you and other individuals that I've already mentioned, as well as the rest of our great speaker lineup. And then over on their end, there will be people like Keith Davids and Richard Shuttleworth and Mark O'Sullivan and Nick Winkleman and those individuals, and we're going to just basically talk about ideas that are sort of themes that were going on at our conference over on our end here in Minnesota, and then what's being talked about over there in Ireland while they're actually going on and participating in a similar event as ours. And then those ideas, I hope, we're going to be able to expose our respective attendees to both sides in sort of the conversation, as well as then their materials will be accessible and available to our attendees, as well as then our materials and presentations and such will be accessible to their attendees. So you essentially get two for the price of one. And, you know, like we said on when they were talking between they and I on Skype a few weeks ago, is even if it just ends up being a conversation between them and I, and our groups and our ideas are represented in that way, or whether people get to come to the actual camera, or whether we just take Carl and Keith and put them in front of each other and have them have a sort of ecological dynamics think tank amongst themselves, so be it. I think it'll be worth the price of admission. Just that 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it ends up being, connecting there with Ireland.
Yeah, no, I think there's so many ways, right, that so many benefits from this, and it is really unique. And yeah, for me, you know, as a researcher side, I'm excited to see what questions people have about using it. And also, I think kind of generating a research to-do list for things we want to expand. Ecological dynamics is relatively new in research terms. So there's a lot of things to do, but just kind of what are the next big questions? What I mean, the tools we can develop for it. And that's kind of one of the things I hope to get out of it personally. Plus, listening to all these speakers as well. So, you mentioned the sharing materials that we talked about this briefly before you started recording. Is you're going to make some videos and obviously maybe share slides and things? Is that the kind of things?
That is the plan at the moment. And for those who are asking about it out there, because much like with your event, I've been getting a fair amount of response in that regards, you know, people who cannot make it there. I will make them accessible in some way, shape, or form, kind of post hoc. I'm not certain if I'll be able to have live streaming based on sort of the situation and the setup at the university there, but I will be able to put the presentations together, and anyone who's attending will automatically have access to those. People who might not be able to attend, I'm going to make them accessible in some way, shape, or form, obviously probably for a fee, but yet on that same token, there probably will not be live streaming, but it will be available in some way, shape, or form after the fact. I'm just kind of working out some of those details as we speak. So as my NFL guys sort of get back here to getting back to training, I realized how much was quickly going to be placed on my plate. And so I'm juggling some of those things as we speak.
Yeah, no, I know it from mine. It's a tricky thing to do, especially the first time when you, all the other details. You've never been to the held event at that place, and little things. So yeah, I think people will anything we can provide. I think people will get a value out of it. So is there anything else that we missed about the kind of structure of the?
No, I mean, I think the biggest things there is, I could not be more pleased and more humbled by the reception of individuals such as yourself who are so willing to come to this type of ground and have these types of conversations and integrate in these ways and really sort of start the primer and start the fire on this movement a little bit more fully and deeply, to let it pick up momentum. And that's really what the event is about. I don't think any of the presenters, even though we have extraordinarily world-class thought leaders and experts, and I say that with the lineup that I look at, not only here, but then the guys obviously in Ireland, the guys and gals in Ireland, I think what we're doing here is going to be hopefully the next frontier in sort of uncovering sort of the mystery of sport movement problems and how athletes connect to them in the live, chaotic, organic environment. And the more that we can all do that together, obviously that's what this type of event is about. So I'm even open to anyone who's listening or going to be in attendance. If there's ideas or things that you want to hear and see discussed, by all means, feel free to fire me an email, because I want to make this as much about the attendees and what everyone is doing together for us all to take a step forward in evolution. I guess now that I say that, there is something else that we didn't mention is the very first morning of, I'm opening up access to an NFL skills session that I'm putting on. So now that I'm thinking about it myself, I'm not even trying. Hopefully that doesn't sound selfish, but the first 3 hours of that morning of the first day of the event, the Friday, April 6th, I'm going to have my NFL guys coming and participating in a constraints-led approach style of movement skill session. And you'll be able to sort of see them and see hopefully my facilitation and my coaching and my teaching there, living and breathing, and hopefully be able to make me better as a group. So everyone is invited to that who's going to be in attendance at the conference. And from there, I'm going to have a number of my players then sort of kick off the conference and do a Q&A with what their experiences are with some of these more constraints-led approaches in comparison to that which way that they've trained before, and maybe how they view movement skill and some of these practice means and methods that they've been experiencing. So we might have guys who have only been with me for a few months to guys who've been with me for 5, 6, 7 years. So you'll be able to see a really varied experience there, and you'll be able to, at least at the very minimum, watch a few world-class NFL players prepare for their respective upcoming season.
No, I think that's going to be awesome. And, hearing you talk about it is one thing. Watching a video is slightly better, but actually getting to sit in a practice session and see how you implement, that's a whole different, whole level better understanding of how to do this stuff. And yeah, no, that sounds really good. And yeah, one of the things I'm hoping we can, these meetings and stuff, we could kind of build a network. We're already starting on Twitter, I think, but because I don't know, I'm sure you get the same. I get a lot of email questions now about, I'm this kind of coach and with these, and I really heard this and I like the idea. And one of the things I really like about this area, it's not just this area, but people seem to be so willing to share. Not many people I've met seem to be really kind of, holding their ideas close to their chest and trying to be secretive.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you want a whole training program, you're going to have to be a client, but just I'm always happy to give just casual advice and point people to a paper or something. Yeah. So,
well, and I think that is something, and I know you and I have kind of talked about this in the past as well as a number of the presenters and I think that is something that can sort of emerge from this if we want to use, the ecological dynamics ideas. I think us coming together as component parts will allow an emergence of sort of that connection and sort of that network that we're speaking on here. So there might become a much bigger network, or that is my hope and intention with it as well, beyond integration. If integration hopefully isn't just going to be on Friday, April 6th and Saturday, April 7th in St. Paul, Minnesota, that hopefully isn't where the integration will stop. We're hoping that the connection and the network actually has some dynamics that emerge from it that allow people to truly continue to learn from it. And it becomes one big self-organizing system if we want to think about it in that way.
Yeah, and I guess the last main question, and this is one I asked Ed, Phil, and Ollie. So the theme is around ecological dynamics and constraints, and obviously, as we know on Twitter and things, not everybody is a firm believer of this. So I asked them this, so what about the skeptics? Are they welcome? I'm sure I know your answer, but just people that are unsure about the value of this and maybe skeptical about these ideas. What do you think about the value they might get out of this?
Yeah, I think not only the value that they will get out of it, but the value of the people who sit on any side of the fence. I'm not trying to push my ideas. It's not propaganda in some way, shape, or form. I want to discuss ideas, and if integration is truly going to be the goal, then it's not just about those respective people who wear respective niche hats, but it's about people who exist on opposite ends of the spectrum coming together and speaking about this, because it's about finding the truth. And none of us know the truth right now. We just all have ideas around the truth and, our perspectives. And I think sharing perspectives from our respective experiences is really where there's going to be some worth. I had offered, on that same token, and maybe it'll happen in the future, I had, reached out to a number of individuals that I know are really strongly and adamantly against sort of ecological dynamics ideas to come together and allow us to sit up in front of the whole group. Unfortunately, no one obliged to do exactly that. But so maybe that will be something that happens in the future, but not to make it a debate where people jump on, one bandwagon versus another, or people jump and attack one group or another. And that's not really what I wanted to do with our theme. But what I wanted to do with our theme was start discussing these ideas, and we might in a more public forum. And as we do that, we might find some different paths that we need to go down, and how ideas from some of the more, let's just call it traditional ways of thinking, or ways that fit outside of the ecological dynamics box could help us explain what we're after as far as certain concepts and principles within the ecological dynamics framework. Because I don't think any respective framework, as I know you and I have discussed in the past, fully explains everything that we see or what we do in our means and our methods towards skill acquisition.
Yeah, very similar to theme to the answer I got from those guys.
Oh, perfect. Bring that wasn't rehearsed in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, that's what I figured. Bring it on. Or open to discussion and bring it on. So, I think that's all the questions I have about it. Is there? So the meeting, as I said, is on April 6th and 7th. The registration is open. There'll be a link in the show notes. And
perfect.
And is there anything else you wanted to add about the meeting, or?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is if anybody, again, has any questions about it, they want to maybe give their input or their feedback or whatever it might be, please feel free to reach out to me, and maybe a little bit till I get back in touch, just simply because my NFL guys are all kind of back up and full steam ahead here. But they can feel free to reach out to me. And even if they don't want to talk about the conference, hopefully that from prior experience that I'm always willing to discuss anything related to movement skill acquisition and sport movement behavior. And people can feel free to reach out to me at Shawn, SHAWN, at optimizemovement.com, or they can find me at Movement Miyagi, Twitter handle. So I'm always willing to discuss anything and everything, whether it relates to sport movement conference or also obviously anything related to the topic itself.
Oh, that's great, Shawn. Thanks for coming on today and talking about everything, and I'm really looking forward to this event.
The pleasure is all mine, my friend, and I appreciate you and the platform and the forum that you've given me to at least be able to put out these thoughts and ideas, and I can't wait to see you in about 6 weeks here.
Thanks again for the great discussion as usual, Shawn. Really excited to be a participant in this great event. You can find a link to register for the Sport Movement Skill Conference in the show notes. If you're going, definitely come over and say hi. We are the movement. Also, remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including an extra monthly episode, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled.
I'd have drunk myself sick.